good to be back. But boy, what did I walk into? My gosh, this is beautiful. Did you build this? Because I miss the outdoor bathrooms, but other than that, I mean, it's just really great. So I thank God for what he's done here. Is my sound okay there, Noah? Okay. Can you hear me deep in the belly of the ark? So, yes, and Lawrence and Louise are like our children. No, that makes me too old. Anyway, but Louise and I were trying to figure out what year we kind of formally entered into a partnership. And I think that was in the year 2000. So it was very natural because we're such close friends and we share so many of the same values and experiences in the Lord. And so it was not a big jump. And we just desperately want to help each other in this great work of bringing the gospel to his chosen people. And so it's just a joy to be here. And there's really a lot of you here. You always have this many people, or is it me? No, I scared myself to death early this morning. I went to look at the Celebrate Messiah website, and Alan and I were staring at me, and I said, my gosh, who would want to come? So anyway, well, Lawrence gave me no more than an hour and 15 minutes. And so I want to move, this thing moves. I want to move along a little bit. So I've been giving a lot of thought to who we are as Messianic Jews and Gentiles and what God's got for us in the days ahead. We're living in pretty interesting days, huh? I'm telling you, if you can't see the signs of the times, you need your eyes fixed. And so I'm not one for predicting I always like to say things are fulfilled prophetically after we know they're really done. So, when people say, well, do you think the Lord's coming soon? I say, yes. However, when will we know these prophecies are all true? When the Lord comes back. So I don't want to embarrass God and stand on the edge like that. But I do really believe that one of the signs of the end times is what Paul wrote about in Romans 11:5, that there would be in every age a remnant according to God's gracious choice. And then if you track with Paul all the way through to the end of Romans chapter 11, you see that there will be a massive turning of Jewish people to Jesus. And so the way I view it is that it's actually a little more incremental, and that the movement of Jewish people turning to the Messiah, Yeshua, will happen throughout the end of days and then intensify as the other signs of the end begin to intensify. Matthew 24, birth pangs I never had them, but I watched them, twice. But so these birth pangs will get more and more intense, and I think that the Messianic movement will get stronger and stronger and stronger until the day comes when the entire nation of Israel will turn to Jesus. And I look forward to that great day. But I don't want to wait for that great day. I want to start now. And so I want to participate with God in what he's doing in what I believe to be these last days, in helping my fellow Jewish people come to know that you really can be Jewish and believe in Yeshua. And so I think a lot about our future, but I also think a lot about our past, because I have a deep sense of heritage. I know many of you do. That's kind of a Jewish thing, having a sense of heritage. And we think about it a lot. We think about genealogies, we think about our forefathers, and as I once mentioned to somebody about why, they were wondering why I made such a big deal out of Jewish stuff and so on. I said, have you read the Bible? And they said, yes. I said, we have a pretty critical role. You meet a lot of Jewish people in the Bible, And so if you like the Bible, hopefully you like Jewish people, because we're all over the Bible. And so we're looking forward to what God is going to do, but we stand upon a great heritage, and I'd like to speak about that heritage today. The foundation stone is always Yeshua. That's the rock upon which this house is built, but there are others as well. So let me read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and then allow me to go backwards a little bit. So we do not know who the author of Hebrews is. Lawrence knows, but he's not telling. But most of us do not know who the author of Hebrews is. You know, a lot of theories. Latest one is Luke. Some people say Aquila. Some people say Priscilla. Some people say Paul. You know, and everybody has their opinion. And in a Messianic congregation, you have more opinions than usual. And so we don't really know who it is, but whoever it was, we know that God inspired them, and whatever came out of their pen was inerrant and perfect because God ordained it, right? All right. Therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let's get rid of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let's run with endurance the race set before us, looking only to Yeshua, the originator and perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He went through all of that for you and me. But God commendeth his love, forgive the King James, but for God commendeth his love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us. We'll never get to the point of our own personal spirituality or holiness where we actually deserve what Yeshua did for us. He died so we can live, and we would never have to endure what he had to endure, which is the Father turning away from him. And so the Father never turns away from us because Yeshua took it all for us. And so he endured a lot for us. And verse 3, and then I'll go backwards. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself. And here it is, this great encouragement, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And so if we want to identify with him, don't we? If we want to identify with him, then we know that he went through all of this for us, but he also knows that we're going to go through it too. And so he paved the way. And he says, don't give up. Don't ever give up. So it's a little bit about the book of Hebrews, then we'll go backwards. All of what we read in chapter 12 is based upon chapter 11, which I called the Hall of Messianic Heroes. I take a little liberty with that, you know. So it's the Hall of Messianic Heroes. And you walk through and you imagine seeing beautiful portraits of Abraham and David and Moses and Sarah and all sorts of the great saints that went before us. And again, it's a kind of a Jewish thing. You just pay attention to what's happened before. And so this Hall of Heroes is really important, and whoever wrote the book of Hebrews pays attention to it. And so we read about some of the great saints of the past. And it fits within the argument of the book of Hebrews. So the argument of the book of Hebrews is Yeshua is better. Okay? Yeshua is better. Yeshua is the best. Doesn't mean that everything before that was no good. It just means that he's the ultimate. So he's the best of what was probably pretty good. And so he's better than the angels. He's better than Moses. Boy, that was a tough one to accept. You know, Judaism has so almost deified Moses. To think that even the Messiah would be better than Moses is a really big deal. But you read Deuteronomy chapter 18, and Moses himself said that one's coming like me who you will report to because he'll be greater than me. And you need to obey his word. In John chapter 5, Yeshua said, don't think in that day I will accuse you. It will be Moses who accuses you. And so he is greater than Moses. He's greater than the Levitical priests. He's greater than the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol. He provides a better rest, a better sacrifice, a better covenant, a better hope, and much more. He's just better. Everything in the Bible. And ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, you guys all know about the Lubavitch Hasidim and all of those people. In my home in the Holy Land, Brooklyn, where I live, works every time. See, because everybody knows it really is the Holy Land. Okay? So I'm about 10 blocks from where Menachem Schneerson used to live. And if there's one, so I speak to just a few Hasidic Chabadniks a lot, and some of my favorite people. And they understand that everything pointed to the Messiah. They just have the wrong one. But they have the right idea. And the author of the book of Hebrews tells us how we can have this relationship with God and have this relationship through Yeshua. And we think about it, and the conclusion is something that probably Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all our forefathers really did understand as well, because the way you get into this relationship is through faith. It's not that we have more or better faith than those who went before us. They may have had more faith than us, but faith in Yeshua gets more done because he's the ultimate. He's the ultimate. And so in Hebrews 1:1, I think we get it encapsulated. Let me just read it. Hebrews 11 verse 1. Now faith is the certainty of things hoped for proof of things not seen, for by it the people of old gained approval. And then in verse 6, we learn about what faith really is. And we get it defined for us a little bit. So Hebrews 11 verse 6, this is a big letter Bible that's still too small for me. And without faith, it's impossible to please him, for the one who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he proves to be one who rewards those who seek him. And then, of course, the common theme all the way through Hebrews chapter 11 is by faith Abraham, by faith Moses, by faith everybody. Okay? And so faith is essential to following the Lord. And what I've noticed about faith at this point in my life, and it particularly is exemplified by those who are in the Hall of Hebrews, Hall of Heroes, is that faith makes you do things other people won't do. Right? Faith becomes visible through who you are and what you do. And the one thing that everybody did in this Hall of Heroes is their faith made them sacrificial. Their faith made them selfless. Their faith led to their suffering. And so, for example, Moses in Hebrews 11:24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. And so faith oftentimes led to suffering. Certainly led to suffering for Yeshua himself, didn't it? So denying ourselves the rewards of this world because of our faith, because we follow Yeshua who suffered before us and called us to reject the things of this world and to live for him, we are going to go through hard times. We're going to suffer. And aren't you glad you came today? But we are going to suffer. That's part of it. So the way you got into the Hall of Heroes was you had faith that caused you to sacrifice or to suffer. Here's my favorite passage at the end of Hebrews 11 because it's a bit of a summary at the end of it. Let me read it to you. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, not accepting their release so that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others experienced mocking and flogging and further chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. That was Isaiah, by the way, according to Jewish tradition. They were tempted. They were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, wandering in deserts, on mountains, and sheltering in caves and holes in the ground. Boy, how's that for marketing the Messianic faith, huh? A little different than what you usually hear, right? And all these gained approval through their faith. Their faith made them do things that normal people don't do. Their faith caused them to be motivated to sacrifice it all for Yeshua. Why? Glad you asked. Because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. In other words, we walk by faith, we suffer by faith, we endure terrible things by faith, we also accomplish great things by faith. It's all by faith. What is happening on the inside, our faith, is expressed on the outside through the way we live and what we do. And so we know we're following Jesus. You know other people are following Jesus because Yeshua calls us to follow him, and he never spent the night in the Hilton, you know, or a nice hotel. He had nowhere to put his head. And so Yeshua led a life of suffering, and he calls upon us to live by faith because there's something out there that's better. I loved it in the description of Abraham, that he was looking for a city whose foundation was laid by God. And God was actually the chief architect of that, is the chief architect of that new city. In other words, because of Yeshua, we have the hope of heaven, and so we can live in a godly way, forsaking the things of this world, because we know that a better world awaits us. And that's how you get into the Hall of Heroes, by the way. So if you want your picture in there, you're gonna have to go through stuff. So I asked myself the question, who the cloud of witnesses might be. And so the term used in the Greek New Testament for cloud actually refers to a mass of clouds. So great a cloud of witness refers to, it's kind of a large number. And the phrase surrounding us implies that the crowd sees what we're doing or might even be involved in what we're doing. And so the big debate comes with the cloud of witnesses. You know, you can't read the Bible without having a good debate, or, you know, you wouldn't know it's a Jewish book. So the question is whether or not this cloud of witnesses is passive, and we just learn from their example in Scripture, or whether they're out there somewhere waiting for the Lord to return, when according to Daniel chapter 12 and other passages, they will be more directly involved. Let's say they're in soulful form, and in the resurrection, their bodies get reconnected, right? Yes. You believe that, right? Yes. Okay. So, where is this cloud of witnesses? Are they an example, or are they cheering in the stands? Well, I married an Argentine Jewish woman, and I love Lionel Messi. Now, if you were watching the World Cup, I'm sorry, you know, the U.S. lost too, so, you know. But, you know, we always say, may the better team win, and that better team is always Argentina. And I was watching, as I'm watching this whole thing, I'm a little weird. I'm thinking of Hebrews chapter 12, So if you want to know what cheering looks like, watch a football game with Argentina. And the people are shouting goal and goal, and they're cheering and cheering. So does this mean that Abraham and Moses and all of the great saints that went before are up in the heavenly stands, looking down, cheering us on as we run this race, and telling us to drop that sin, drop that entanglement in the world, and just keep going. Focus on the goal, who's Yeshua. I don't know. I haven't heard him, but I can tell you this, that whether it's by example or they're actually cheering me on, I know that there are some great people that I can't wait to meet. And I look forward to it. And it motivates me. Now, I don't think that the whole of Heroes was actually completed by the time the book of Hebrews was done. Because great people who love the Lord and live sacrificially keep dying and going to heaven in a preliminary sense. And so Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, that great resurrection chapter, tells us that death should not be feared. We shouldn't fear death. He says if there's no resurrection of the dead, not even Yeshua has been raised. And if Yeshua has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith also is in vain, and it means we run in vain. And so it's worth the sacrifice in this life because Yeshua conquered death. He rose from the dead, and he's waiting with open arms for each and every one of us. And because of that, this race is worth winning. And we win simply by running faithfully. So who will we meet there? Well, like I said, I like paying attention to our history. Do you know that there are going to be a whole bunch of Messianic Jewish believers who lived by faith and sacrificed in similar ways to the other heroes in Hebrews chapter 11? And I thought today that I might introduce you to some of our heroes. I mean, you know the ones in the Bible, but you don't know the ones not in the Bible, probably. And I think that they're worth knowing. Some of us sometimes think that the Messianic movement is a new idea. It's not. And so we've had some great heroes that have gone before us. So I'd like to introduce you to two. Is that okay? And then we'll learn a few lessons from them. But the way I want to do this, I have to read because I couldn't memorize it all. Alan Shore can memorize large portions of text. I cannot. So the first person I'd like to introduce you to, who you're going to meet, he's not in Hebrews 11, but he's in the stands, cheering. And his name is Isaac Feinstein. Do you know him? Yitzchak Feinstein? Do you know him by his Hebrew name? Okay. So, I know who you know. Do you know Richard Wurmbrand? Yes. Okay. So do you know Richard Wurmbrand was from Romania? Okay. And do you know that Richard Wurmbrand led Isaac Feinstein led Richard Wurmbrand to the Lord. Wouldn't you like to meet whoever led Richard Wurmbrand to the Lord? So this is Isaac Feinstein. So actually, Richard Wurmbrand wrote a great little book. I don't know if many people have read it. It's got a non-messianic title, but we can clean it up. The title is Christ on the Jewish Road. Anybody here read that? Okay, great. 3 people. That's terrific. It's a bestseller. 4. I read it. So Wurmbrand, who survived the Holocaust, survived the Communist Revolution, survived jails, wrote about his dear, dear mentor, Isaac Feinstein. And he says this: Isaac was a business executive in a small town in Galatz, which is a very Jewish area of Romania. Galiciana, some of you know that word. He heard the gospel at a Christian gathering there. He received Jesus as his Messiah and almost immediately experienced great persecution from his family, as his father was from an observant Jew. After growing as a believer, he sensed God's call on his life to serve the Jews of Romania. This is happening in the 20s and 30s. He went to the London Society Training School in Warsaw. So stop there for a moment. There was a Messianic Jewish, like what Lawrence and Louise and the team here have prepared online, this Messianic training thing, which is unique and different. I looked at it today. It's beautiful. It looks great and so on. But to say it's original, not so original. So the Anglicans, CMJ, the Church's Ministry Among the Jews, who started a mission agency to reach Jewish people in 1809. It was started by a Jewish believer. Anglicans started everything, And so they began a school in Poland where they taught Yiddish, they taught Talmud, they taught Bible, they taught some of the greatest workers among the Jewish people, including Isaac Feinstein. According to Wurmbrand, he had an unlimited capacity for work. He published a periodical for adults, one for children, as well as countless pamphlets. He preached all over the country, became an outstanding personality among the disciples of Yeshua in Romania. Then it gets serious. Wurmbrand adds that Feinstein was a young man, only 37 years old, when the war broke out. So we're going back to 1940. He had formed a Messianic congregation in Galatz in the town of Yash. So yes, Messianic. We're going to learn more when you stay for the conference. Were there Messianic congregations during the days of the Holocaust? The short answer, yes. Yes. He would visit Wurmbrand regularly in Bucharest, and Wurmbrand tells the story of one of these visits. He said, the atmosphere in Yash was infected by anti-Semitism, with the ever-present overhanging threat of a pogrom. Feinstein was on a short visit to Bucharest and was staying with me. I suggested that he not return to Yash, where death lay in wait for him. Actually, through the Iron Guard, the Nazis had not arrived yet. But they were influencing the Iron Guard. So, Wurmbrand said, we could send a Romanian brother for your wife and 6 children and bring them back to Bucharest. Now, here's his answer. This is what makes him great. He answered, the shepherd's duty is to die together with his flock. I know they will kill me, but I cannot abandon my brethren. I'm going back to Yash. And by the way, the entire congregation was wiped out and everybody was killed. On June 28, 1941, a pogrom broke loose, and the number of Jewish people killed in his little area was 11,000. Feinstein was arrested. They took him to the police headquarters, where, according to Wurmbrand, he preached to those who were his fellow detainees. I believe it. He exhorted them to come to faith in Yeshua and to prepare to meet God. And here's the touching part, and I've read many different sources for these stories, and they all say the same thing in one way or another. According to Wurmbrand, he died while a rabbi was reciting Psalms aloud, and Feinstein was explaining how they foretold of Yeshua. Death came by suffocation with his head resting on the rabbi's shoulder. And I believe all this. In our own magazine, Chosen People magazine, which is why the group is called Chosen People, the founder of Chosen People was Rabbi Leopold Cohn. He was from Hungary, And Chosen People Ministry was founded in 1894. So you thought I was the founder of Chosen People. I'm not. And he came to faith in Yeshua in 1892 in New York City. And his son, Joseph Cohn, and many others knew what was about to happen. It was clear to them. So Joseph Cohn went to Europe with a lot of geld. Verstehst du ein bisschen Yiddish? Okay, a lot of geld, a lot of money, basically strapped to his body, and got on a train and began visiting the various Messianic Jewish leaders, trying to buy them out. Buy them out. And Cohen writes, it was the summer of 1938. Feinstein and I were working on the Buddhist side of the Danube. Feinstein was a beloved young Jewish brother who was stationed in Galatz, about 200 miles east of Budapest, and was carrying on a faithful and brilliant testimony for Yeshua under the support of some Christian brethren in Norway. It's true, it was called the Norwegian Israelite Mission. Cohn, who was more of a recruiter even than me, said, I coveted this young man and his talents for our work in the States. Every time I looked into his face, I could not help but think of Nathaniel, the old Israelite in whom our Lord found no guile. His eyes burned with the explosiveness of impassioned zeal. He had the perfect background for a ministry to the Jewish people in New York. He was young, steeped in all Hebrew laws. He was a master in Israel. He could speak to his Jewish compatriots. I turned to him suddenly and asked if he would leave Romania and take his wife and 6 children and come to America and join our staff. I pointed out the imminent dangers developing in Europe and the brutal thoughts of Nazism, and asked him to ponder and to pray seriously over the question as to whether or not the Lord would not have him leave these lands of horror and come to America for a greatly enlarged field of service and testimony. He was overwhelmed for a moment, but soon recovered his poise. And he told me frankly with affection and emotion how grateful he was for the compliment, but that he felt it would be an act of cowardice to leave his post in the face of threatening dangers. He felt, Nazis or no Nazis, it was his duty to stay on his post. And so he died. He was a messianic hero. He had faith, and faith erupted in suffering and death. What was inside of him came out through his sacrifice. And he is a role model and an example for you and me of a godly person who renounced the things of this world. He had 6 kids. He could have said, I have to stop, maybe get out for the sake of my children. He didn't do that. I'm not passing judgment on anybody who has, but he didn't do it. He was a Yeshua, all or nothing person, because faith is the conviction of things not seen. And as far as I'm concerned, his picture could be up in the Messianic Hall of Heroes. And I think I like the more active understanding of the cloud. I'm not sure if the Greek supports it, but it preaches so much better. And it's a better image. But I know that one day I'm going to meet him. Maybe, hopefully, right after Yeshua says, well done, thou good and faithful servant, may I introduce you to Isaac. one of my hopes and dreams. Okay. I'll be under 2 hours. So may I introduce you to one more, whose portrait really should be there. And where's Nettie? Somewhere here. Where's Nettie? And Nettie and Paul. Okay. Nettie, you're going to like this one. Okay? John Rotenberg. Guess where he was from? Good Jewish Dutch boy. And some of you will meet Kelvin if you're staying for the LCJE, Calvin just wrote a book on the role of the Dutch Messianic Jews during the Holocaust. And it's a great book. So, John Rotenberg, nice name, nice Dutch name, was born Alter Mendel Rotenberg. And his dad was a rabbi. And Yitzchak Rotenberg. And about 1911, he had come to faith at a Reformed church, Dutch Reformed church, in Rotterdam. Changed his name to Rotenberg, added a T, maybe so people, you know, when some of us come to faith, sometimes we do what we can to avoid embarrassing our families. Even though we hope they wouldn't be embarrassed, we understand that it is sometimes. So I believe that's why he did that. Rotenberg served in the Elam House in Rotterdam when the Nazis marched into Holland. Rotenberg, again, refused to leave his post, although he knew it would cost him his life. One of the leaders he received all his theological training in America. He left Holland and went to America and went to Calvin College and all these other Dutch Reform schools, and he led a Jewish ministry in Chicago, but then he had the opportunity to go back to Europe immediately before the Holocaust. Who does that? Who does that? And according to what we read, he was taken to a detainment camp in Amersfoort, forgive me for my pronunciation, during the German occupation. And it was there that he suffered incredible physical abuse and suffering, and he passed away. There was a letter from his brother-in-law, who actually wrote to some of the Messianic leaders in the U.S., speaking about his brother-in-law. And he wrote, "Dear friend," this is June 11th, 1945, "Dear friends, it's with great thanksgiving and joy that I write to you to let you know that we've received a letter from my sister in Holland, and she wrote she and the children are well. 2 days after E-Day, 2 Dutch Canadians were willing to see to it and received a letter from Holland and brought it to her by way of Canada. And she wrote that on October 1941, they had decided to come to America. So now we find out more information. But they didn't leave soon enough. So he was going to send his wife back. And then 1942, John was arrested, went to a concentration camp. It was from the concentration camp the news came that he was killed, taken from there and supposedly shot, according to the information we had. And this was now confirmed in this letter. He had many opportunities to not put his life in danger, but he did. He did put his life in danger because he believed God and trusted God. So what can we learn from some of these great saints that will now make it into the Hall of Heroes? Because, believe me, they're already there. I think that they teach us a few lessons for the Messianic movement today and for the future. Lesson number 1. The witnesses in Hebrews 11 and the witnesses, these Messianic heroes, were courageous. Courage is a biblical value. Our Messianic forefathers displayed a supernatural ability to face hardship without giving up. They kept going in the face of threat and opposition. We will face opposition as followers of Yeshua. Sometimes we'll face opposition just because the Bible teaches us to stand with Israel and others don't do that. And you might even be persecuted for that. But we must never give in to the incessant pressure to compromise our faith simply because of earthly threat. Like Feinstein and like Yeshua before him, we must run the race with courage until the day comes when we see him face to face. Then you'll understand where your courage comes from. So the writer of Hebrews says, let us run the race with endurance, the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Yeshua, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We are to run with courage. Secondly, we're to run with commitment. We must remain committed no matter what it takes. And our commitment must be to Yeshua and to his people. I think that we not only need to be committed to the Lord, but I think we need to be more committed to one another. And not only in the congregation and with Celebrate Messiah, but I represent lots of fellow Messianic Jews and Gentiles who are doing in the U.S. exactly what you're doing today. And we need one another. And so if we're going to run this race, we need to run the race with courage and commitment, and that commitment is to the Lord and to one another. We need to pray for one another. We need to uphold one another. We need to stand with one another. And we especially need to stand with those, particularly those among us, Jews or Gentiles, who are experiencing deep opposition and persecution from family, governments, others. And so we need to stand with one another, and we need to be committed to one another. We also need to reconfirm our calling, because we're called to do this. I love 1 Corinthians 15:58, where Paul writes, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing your toil is not in vain in the Lord. So in other words, it's not just we who are, quote unquote, in full-time Jewish ministry that need a sense of calling. By God's grace, we all need to cultivate our sense of calling. And what is that calling? That calling is to not only follow Yeshua and be faithful to Yeshua from the inside out, but to reach a dark, sinful, and broken world for Yeshua, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. Courage, commitment to the Lord and one another, and to make sure that our calling is fixed and unbreakable, that we're doing it for the Lord. Brothers and sisters, one day you and I will join the great cloud of witnesses. Either they'll come to us or we'll come to them. So we have to think about the legacy that we're going to leave. What is our legacy? What's the legacy we plan to leave behind for the next generation, particularly of younger believers and those who are committed to the Messianic movement? I hope that we'll leave a legacy like Isaac Feinstein, and like John Rotenberg, and like so many others who couldn't be bought by the world. They wouldn't compromise. They stayed faithful. They ran the race. They set aside sin. They set aside the entanglements of the world so that they were free to run fast right into the arms of Yeshua. So my prayer for all of us is that we'll learn some great lessons from Hebrews 11. We'll learn some great lessons from the lives of these great saints. But I think most of all, probably, the greatest example and role model, the first member maybe of the Hall of Heroes, is Yeshua himself. We set our eyes on him. He's our role model. He's our example. Others follow him, and we want to follow him like they followed him. But he's the one we look to. He's the one that we'll spend all eternity with. He's the one who set the pace. So let's run the race. Be courageous. Be committed. And make sure that your calling is set in stone. That no matter what it takes, you will be faithful to Yeshua in this life. Good? Okay. All right. So I'm going to close in prayer, but right before I close in prayer, I just want to ask some of you, including myself, I always count myself in the group, and that is, how are we doing with our courage, our commitment, and our calling? How's the race going? Getting sidetracked? Have your eyes on something else other than Yeshua sometimes? In case you haven't noticed, we are all still sinners. And so we can stumble and fall in the race. But my brothers and sisters, he is always there picking us up. In fact, in my mind, he's running with me. But I'm wondering if in a time of prayer now we could just take a moment of reflection and silence. Those of you who are online and those of you who are present physically, why don't we just spend a few moments talking to the Lord and telling the Lord that maybe we could run a little better and that we need his help. And you know that he'll give it to you. So let's take a moment and bow in prayer. It's a good time to confess your weakness, to confess distraction, to confess sin, to confess entanglements with the world. To ask the Lord to strengthen you, forgive you, and to refocus you. The longer you walk with him as a believer, the closer you get. And when you get closer, you understand how easy it is to get distant. If you need God's help in coming back to him or asking him to help you, to strengthen you, let me pray, and then maybe you'll pray this prayer with me. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, thank you for your son, Yeshua. Thank you that he's the author and finisher of my faith. Thank you that he endured the cross for the joy set before him. Thank you that he's paved the way. He set the example. Thank you for the way that there are other Jewish believers who have run the race with incredible dedication and sacrifice. And Lord, I can say for myself, I want to be like Isaac. I want to be like John Rotenberg. I don't welcome their end, but Lord, if it comes, it comes. Lord, I want to be like them. But most of all, I want to be like you. And Lord, I pray that you would strengthen my legs, that you would clear my path, and Lord, that you would enable me to run fast right into your arms. And I pray all of this in the wonderful name of our great Messiah, Yeshua. Amen.